And that's going to bring us to our first panel discussion on policy, process, and technology to advance artificial intelligence. Moderating this discussion for us is Dr. Reggie Brothers. He currently serves as operating partner at AE Industrial Partners. And prior to this role, he held other leading positions at Big Bear AI, Peraton, and the Chertoff Group. And he previously served as Under Secretary for Science and Technology at the Department of Homeland Security and held other leading roles at the Department of Defense and DARPA. We have an awesome group of AI experts, including Mr. David Larrimore, Chief Technology Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, Ms. Shani Spivak, Director of Emerging Technology and International Collaboration at the National Security Council, and Mr. Tom Gann, who is the Chief Public Policy Officer at Trellix. So welcome to all of you, and Dr. Brothers, I will turn things over to you.
Megan, thanks so much. Really do appreciate it. For this first panel, what we'd like to do is talk about AI at more of a strategic level. And as such, we want to think about policy, think about applications, these kinds of things. And Megan, you and your team have put together a great panel and really appreciate what you guys have done. And I want to thank the audience for joining us this morning. What I'd like to do is start out in order to kind of give us all a sense of just the context of the panelists. I'd like each of you to just start out talking about what are some of the challenges that you have, day to day? What are some of the things that keep you up at night? So I'd like to start. I'm just looking at my screen. Dave, I'd like to start with you on that one.
Hey, good morning, Reggie. Thank you, and hello, party people. So challenges, right? So as the DHS Chief Technology Officer, we have the incredible challenge of not just providing governance and oversight, but protecting AI. That is one of our highest priorities. What I mean by that is AI has been in use for years, machine learning algorithms, everything from document management with USCIS, everything from facial recognition, right, for things for grants management, et cetera. So we are already using the technology in a lot of places, but lack of appropriate governance, lack of appropriate oversight is becoming an issue where we are worried about whether or not we will continue to be able to use AI ML in the future. There's been a lot of heavily debated topics in executive orders around facial recognition, especially, and getting appropriate oversight, appropriate governance that provides transparency to the public, provides the ability for headquarters to be able to advise on investments, to allow us to provide the appropriate level of oversight when it comes to validating the models to make sure that the systems are being safe and effective, not duplicative, et cetera, else has been a top priority and a hard challenge to solve.
That's a great way to start us off, Dave. We appreciate that. Shani?
Yeah, I think to David's point, a lot of this, there's no easy solution or one size fits all solution. So I think one of the major challenges I see is how to identify the best practices and the methodologies that are going to be effective in as many use cases as possible, or in the right use cases where we see the most risk. So there are a lot of efforts across government to work on this, notably out of NIST and OSTP and other places. And I also want to commend the agencies, the departments and agencies themselves, for taking a lot of this on, because they've done a lot of background work in identifying for their department, for their agency, what that looks like, what responsible AI looks like for each particular use case, understanding that we're not going to have very large scale frameworks that apply across the board and effectively mitigate risk, or identify all those areas where we can either be have one practice in place that applies to every use case in every agency. That just won't be the case. So really the challenge is how scalable are certain mechanisms or certain considerations, and for the rest of it, it's really about injecting a lot more critical thinking and maybe independent thought into the process, and as much kind of outside engagement as possible where it's applicable.
Thank you. Tom.
Well, first, it's a Great thing to be on this panel. Really look forward to it. First, Trellix. We're a new company. We're the combination of McAfee and FireEye. Our exclusive focus is on government and also business. In terms of a challenge, it's an opportunity to integrate these companies. We're very focused on delivering next generation XDR solutions. A good portion of that value proposition is around integrating AI and machine learning capabilities to leverage our various assets for the benefit of our customers. To answer your question on what keeps me awake at night, what I'm concerned about, AI is an incredible growth area, great opportunity. Different market forecasts suggest a $30 trillion market opportunity on a global basis, with the US, China, Europe, being real competitors to play in a big role in this new world. There are great social benefits to AI. We've certainly heard about the consumer aspects. On the flip side, there are security risks with any new technology, and I think that's an area we want to take a look at. I think there's also the question of an entirely new set of technologies being delivered at scale on a global basis where we don't yet fully understand all the implications. Technology always has great upside, also has risks. And I think the challenge for policymakers, the challenge for the private sector, really to continue to talk, collaborate, think through the ways in which we get into this bright future in a positive way.
Thanks a lot. And by the way, I don't want to just be peppering you guys with questions. Please feel free to just speak, to have a conversation. Okay. The next question I'd like to ask you guys, David, you talked about applications. The video we saw as a lead-in showed applications. What are some of the applications, the near-term applications? You mentioned that DHS is using them right now. You mentioned facial recognition. What are some of the areas that you think in the near-term AI is best applied?
Oh, man. Okay. So in the past, DHS has been leveraging AI for a lot of internal efficiencies, right? So we've got to tag these documents, and these documents are 50 pages long. Are we going to manually go through and read them? Well, we can use NLP to be able to go and automatically tag documents, saving a significant amount of time, like real burden reduction, real cost savings. And that's incredible. We're starting to realize that there's another approach, there's another angle, rather. And so we have used the customer experience executive order as a driver and a push for AI, right? So when you talk about facial recognition, right? Facial recognition had predominantly been used as a mechanism to provide a higher level of identity verification for, being able to provide validation or verification of an individual. We're now realizing that that technology can be used to provide a better experience. So when you're at an airport, we can use facial recognition to provide a touchless experience for travelers, right? All the controls and safety need to be put in place when it comes to human in the loop, when it comes to notification, all of that has to happen. But if a citizen wants to be able to have a faster, touchless experience in the airport, like, we can use AI/ML technologies to do that, right? Looking at AI/ML for reduction when it comes to the Paperwork Reduction Act, right? Burden reduction there. So we are really investing energy and time into looking at AI to solve customer experience problems, not just cybersecurity, not just forms and internal efficiencies.
What do you see in right now in terms of adoption? Because there's an interesting Harvard Business Review article, I think it was a couple of years ago. They talked about one of the biggest challenges is culture, right? It's actually adopting these kinds of tools. What are you seeing in terms of the adoption within DHS of these technologies?
I think it's the adoption is tends to follow the market, and it tends to follow risk. So I have a vendor engagement group inside of the CTO's office, and we meet constantly with companies that are bringing new types of AI, ML technologies, different types of workbench technologies and platforms that generalize existing open source algorithms, et cetera. And what we tend to find is we don't look necessarily at the impact to the mission as much as cost savings. That traditionally has been the overall marker, right? So this technology costs X amount of dollars. Is that going to save us Y amount of dollars? So I think adoption has been predominantly linked to that. So being able to find that use case, I don't think that we have truly adopted that mindset of, is it going to fundamentally improve the experience, right? And is the cost savings as much on the burden to citizens as it is to the cost to a program?
Thank you. Tom, in your earlier comments, you mentioned integrating AI ML. Where are you seeing some of the benefits there, and how's that working so far?
Yeah, excellent question. Well, here's the big thing. The hackers are always innovating very, very rapidly. The latest and greatest cybersecurity solution today that is cutting edge very often can be obsolete in 18 months, simply because hackers, are smart. They have available technology. They're ever learning. So the challenge for our industry is to always keep innovating. For us, what we're doing is combining solution sets from two companies, FireEye and McAfee, and putting a focus on an iron triangle of technology where we deliver capabilities to add benefit from getting data from the endpoint, delivering strong data protection capabilities, and really putting a very large focus on security operations. It's those security op teams that play such a critical role in government and the private sector. And what we believe and what we see is that AI and machine learning can be profoundly useful in helping modernize, helping fuse, helping to get the full benefit of a range of technologies. And for government and business, and we could have a long discussion about this, there's a great cybersecurity gap of skilled people. So automating functions can add great value in particularly dealing with more routine tasks, freeing analysts and people up to do the harder, higher level work. AI has great benefits that really go beyond, a quick answer here on the panel. I think we can delve into them more greatly as we have our discussion. But the ability to learn rapidly, the ability to do pattern recognition at a scale and a level of complexity that exceeds the ability of humans to execute those functions really is an example of the opportunity set from a security point of view.
So, Shani, from your perspective in NSC, where do you see some of the broader applications of AI in the near term? And then what do you see as some of those challenges? Because I do want to have a longer conversation about governance and all those kinds of things kind of after this.
Absolutely. I think in kind of broad terms and across government, I'd say mainly two areas. One being what was already mentioned, dealing with complexity. So helping any industry, government, public sector, civil group with massive amounts of complexity that are just increasing at this point in terms of, you've got data volume, speed and variety. There's just too much for a human being to process in a lot of contexts across a lot of use cases. So AI has been very effective in a lot of those where we're applied responsibly. And I think the other lane is in personalization. So this is maybe a newer topic than some of the earlier discussions around AI and what it could be used for. In personalization, what we see is AI allows us to kind of effectively tune certain processes to different groups to make it easier for them to either engage with that model or to just make the model more effective and equitable in some cases. So I think those two lines are the primary focus areas in terms of utility in AI, because what you always want to avoid is the solution looking for a problem. So I think as long as approaches take the first track of, identifying the problem and figuring out whether AI is in fact the right solution for that problem in the first place, then you find the best use cases of AI in those cases.
Could you articulate a little bit more on the impersonalization? Like what's an example of that?
I think I see a lot of, and this is more on the private sector side at this point, I think, but a lot of companies are looking to use AI to channel user experience to certain users based on their preferences. Now that can be good because it can, provide the right resources for the right people at the right time, or it can be, ineffective in that it could create filter bubbles. So we want to avoid that, and obviously do that in a responsible way. But it helps, I think, in tuning and in understanding where that part of the science is going. So not necessarily these large one-size-fits-all models. I see a lot more in the personalization space, at least more recently.
And challenges. Where do you see some in those two broad categories? Where do you see the challenges in terms of large scale adoption?
Absolutely. I think culture was absolutely part of it. There's limited talent as well. So bridging the divide, I think, between the folks on the technical side who can build and operate the models, who understand the technology, and the people who understand the context. So that can be the users and the program managers, in whatever system, whether it's private sector or public or just a small scale system. It's really about bridging the divide in the team and making sure you've got good kind of fusion of the technical aspects. So how can we build the model, and a good understanding of the context in which the model will operate, the data that will be used, how the users will interact with it, and so on. And there's a ton of other criteria around that. It's very complex, and I'm oversimplifying everything, but I think that's where I see kind of the core challenge is getting everybody kind of on the same page and working together towards the most effective model possible, and knowing that there's a moving goalpost in a lot of these cases. The guardrails are changing pretty rapidly. The discussions around what effective oversight looks like are changing, and a lot of the research is still being done. So we all have a lot to learn, and especially from each other. So that engagement, communication, and representation is very important.
Before we get into the standardization, as you mentioned, governance, let's talk about talent, because all three of you mentioned talent and workforce and these kinds of things. Just whoever wants to start first, can you talk about thoughts on how to increase the talent, whether it's in the government or the private sector?
Shani, would you like to go, or?
Oh, you go ahead. I'll go second, I guess.
Couple things. First and foremost, the product side of the industry is evolving significantly faster than the experts pool available to implement those technologies. So, and that's a factor, right? That's a big factor. So adopting a technology, if I'm unable to prove to our contracting officers that there is a adequate enough vendor pool to be able to support the implementation of a technology, that adds a significant amount of paperwork and burden, sole source, and various other things that sometimes aren't necessarily the juice is worth the squeeze in a lot of areas for trying out a technology that doesn't exist yet, or trying out a technology that is not as commercially available or is not as prevalent as existing technologies. There's another problem too, and that is on the government side, right? We have spent the last 20 years making sure that every single one of our program managers understands how to build ships, guns, and boats. And then we spent the last 8 or 10 years trying to get them to understand how to build IT systems. Well, there has not been a huge change into how are we training folks for AI/ML. Additionally, if you can find a person who is highly experienced in artificial intelligence and machine learning, but willing to get paid a GS 14 or 15 pay to do governance work versus actually implementing the technologies, please give me a call. That's a real problem. Our GS scales does not support the amount that people want to get paid, but we have a critical need for governance and oversight, and that requires experience. So it's a complex problem. And anyway, so it's just part of me being here today is like, well, that's the big so what for us, is figuring out how do we fill that gap.
Are you, I mean, how are you, is there more outreach to universities, more outreach to the private sector? I mean, how are you thinking about trying to kind of open up the aperture to get more folks?
So DHS has made a huge investment to what they're calling what they call CTMS, right? The Cyber Talent Management System. We have been opening the aperture on that to look at other skill sets than specifically cyber. So that is a mechanism available. There's a whole nother side of the story where DHS S&T can talk about their works with the FFRDCs and talk about the work they're doing in the innovation communities, et cetera, and with the academic institutions. But I'm talking about core federal employees, not necessarily on the early research side, right? We need the folks that actually have practical experience to lead projects and have government owned, right? That is a huge problem. We look at a lot of the failures and programs on the past, and that is the government doesn't necessarily own or lead the technology and the implementation of technology because of lack of knowledge, right? And so CTMS is an option that we have. It is a way to start to right size that problem I mentioned previously, but it's literally a year old, right? And so we're still working on getting all the cyber folks in the communities to understand how what certifications are required and how to get involved there, let alone starting to pivot to AI/ML.
Thanks. One thing, after we talked to Shani and Tom about this workforce issue, I do want to come back to you about, you mentioned we haven't really been trained in IT or expand that into developing software, right? Really. And the DoD's done a lot with some of their newer programs, right? Trying to have DevSecOps employed in challenges and these kinds of things. I'd like to come back to you and see if you're doing any of those kinds of things or thinking about some of the ways DoD is approaching some of these things. Shani, over to you. What are some of your thoughts on the workforce development?
Yeah, I think those are really good points, especially about having folks in government with that background, knowledge and experience, because a lot of this can't be outsourced. You can't have just vendors come in and sell tools to the government without having any kind of oversight or visibility. Obviously, there are mechanisms for that, and there are places where like word processors, we can do that with a certain amount of risk tolerance. But there are going to be plenty of examples where we want to have the expertise in-house, and we need to have the expertise in-house to ask the critical questions around these methodologies and to better understand where and how they should be applied. So you have the U.S. Digital Service, and you have fellowships across government, and you have good programs, but there certainly is a lot of room to bring more of that technical expertise in across departments and agencies. And I'm encouraged by things like the National Science Foundation's National AI Research Institutes and work to kind of build those hubs, because that brings in government, academia, private sector working together on big challenges. And then you have the National AI Research Resource Task Force and their interim report. So a lot of really good work in trying to understand how we grow the AI ecosystem in a responsible way, kind of building in from the groundwork. Things like privacy preserving technologies, we're thinking about security, and we're thinking about civil rights and civil liberties that are associated with these technologies along the way.
Dave, I go back to you. Your thumbs up. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I just full support of all of those things. I haven't even dived into the concepts of civil rights and civil liberties, and we work very closely with those offices up in management, and it has been incredible to see how quickly lawyers and policy folks are having to adapt and learn to this new area, and I'm just proud in a lot of ways about how quickly they're starting to become adept at that. And I think it's because there's a deluge of things coming from GAO, OMB, the White House OSTP, right? So they are constantly under fire when it comes to these areas. So they have been forced to adapt and improve and start figuring out what are the impacts to civil rights and civil liberties, and what are the impacts to privacy when it comes to utilizing these technologies. Commercial use has been an incredible area of growth up in management as far as what data can we use, what data can we provide to industry, what can't we provide to industry, what is PII in this world where there's a lot more metadata markers that can create PII than what we originally thought were just kind of like social security number and an email address. There's a lot more there, and we're exploring that areas. And it's been really cool to be part of it. Very excited. Very excited.
Very cool. Hey, Tom, over to you on this workforce development. You've got the dual problem, you're cyber and AI, right? How is Trellix thinking about this?
Well, it's a great question. For example, in general, in the federal government, there tends to be about a 10, 15,000 person gap on cybersecurity skilled professionals every year. It depends on the year. That number can be higher, it can be lower, but based on the research, that's the gap. In the macro sense, there's a gap of, I don't know, 1 million to 2 million cybersecurity skilled individuals at the different levels needed in industry and government on a yearly basis, depending on the studies that you look at. This gap is then even compounded further as both the public and the private sectors are looking for cyber skills that are enhanced with the ability to do AI. What to do about it? I mean, I think for us, and I think other companies, we're really thinking through how we hire. A college degree in computer science is awesome, right? However, we're finding talented people from the gamer community. We're finding talented veterans. An example, a cousin of mine is in cybersecurity now. He did an online program. His initial training was being a firefighter. And it turns out that the firefighting training in a SOC is a huge competitive advantage, right? Because he's learned how to deal with stress. He's learned how to deal with systems and processes. He's learned how to work in a team. Within 3 years, in addition to the online training he got, he's running the SOC. He's thinking about, hey, how am I going to be the chief security officer of my healthcare company now? Diverse backgrounds, right? I mean, there's a kid today flipping burgers. Nothing wrong with flipping burgers. I did it too as a kid, who may just not know they've got incredible talent in this area. So I think for us in the private sector and government, is thinking differently about qualifications. It's reaching out to people and, having a welcome mat and diverse teams that can deliver based on skill sets and a common purpose. There's a huge, great opportunity to turn this gap into a great opportunity set for millions of people.
Well said. Well said. Thank you for that. Shani, I'm going to change from the workforce to now governance. I think this is kind of one of the things you started talking about in the very beginning. From your perspective, how are you thinking about governance of AI? What are the different bins, if you will, that you're thinking about? Is there a framework? You mentioned NIST. How are you thinking about all this?
Yeah, so there's a few kind of ways to look at this across government. One is the Office of Science and Technology Policy recently put out a blueprint for a Bill of Rights, and that focuses around kind of 5 principles. So we see a lot of AI ethics principles across the board, and it is really important that departments and agencies and kind of broad government recognizes that we at least have that benchmark of things we want to strive towards. Now, that is kind of a handbook for people trying to implement these kinds of high-level principles. And you also have the NIST AI risk management framework, and they recently are also, announcing the playbook that's going to be associated with it. You can find out, online all about this. And the good thing about both of these things is they've been kind of open and engaged with experts in academia and private sector, and open for public comment, especially the NIST risk management framework. And a lot of those processes just welcome input from users across the country and the world. I think what's good about the playbook in particular is it starts to get more towards that implementation piece. So the risk management framework is incredibly useful to think through, those high risk and very important processes when you're developing, an AI system. And the playbook allows you to kind of work towards how you best measure that risk, you map that risk, and then you manage that risk. And there's more detail that will be built out from under that. But I think that's a good approach to responsible AI, because, like I said, there's no one size fits all. You're going to have to really think, critically and thoughtfully throughout the development process, no matter what the application is and what the context is. And one important thing I think is really keeping a human-centered mindset around these things, thinking about the users and the people in the humans in the loop, the people working with a particular model or system. Make sure there's representation in that development process, and you understand what the implications are. The big thing is, in very simple terms, what are the implications of a false positive or a false negative? What are the implications of an error in any given system?
You mentioned responsible AI. What do you call responsible AI? I mean, because the Department of Defense, Secretary Austin said we won't buy anything that's not responsible, right? They've got their pillars of responsible. How do you define responsible AI? What does that mean to you?
I think for me, it's that representation. I mean, you're never going to have, perfect balance in all systems across all of these mechanisms. So you want privacy, you want security, you want effectiveness in terms of low error rates, and you want equitable systems so that the error rates aren't different for different populations, for example. But it is very, very difficult to find balance across those things. So I think engaging early and often across that process in terms of stakeholders, you have your legal reps, your policy reps, potentially user communities and the folks that are operating those systems, the folks who really understand the context in which they operate. All of that requires that conversation. It is not an easier or simple thing. So no matter what framework is out there, it'll have to be adapted in some way across these systems. And I think that's the responsible piece of it. It's really taking the time and putting in the effort. And I see a lot of government, departments and agencies doing exactly that, which has been very encouraging.
That's good. Thank you. David, at DHS, how are you, do you talk about responsible AI? I know you mentioned ethics earlier. How are you thinking about, or are you guys thinking about, like I said, DoD saying we're only going to buy responsible AI, right? I mean, how are you imposing those kind of constraints, or how are you guys thinking about it?
I brought up the executive order. I'm going to say, well, it's lawful and respectful of our nation's values, purposeful and performance-driven, accurate, reliable and effective, safe, secure and resilient, understandable, responsible and traceable, clearly and regularly monitored, transparent and accountable. All of those things put together. The reality is it depends, right? So when we say AI ML, we're talking about a broad spectrum of technologies and processes. For example, in the beginning of this discussion, I talked about one area, and Shani was talking about a whole area which I never even tend to think, and that is when you talk about machine learning and modeling and what we do for things like evaluating emergencies and doing statistical samples. Like, that's a whole different area of AI ML versus sentiment analysis and topic modeling, right? So you've got a starting point and destination. There are planes, trains, automobiles, motorcycles, magic carpets, right? Like, Star Trek transporters. Like, there's all of those ways to get there. Well, what is the most responsible way to get there, right? What systems are you going to put in place that meet the need? What systems are you going to put in place that allow you to safely meet that need, right? So when we talk about error rates and exception rates, right? That's a real thing, right? When you look at facial recognition, there has been a lot of talk recently about, I keep going back to facial recognition because it's a big thing all over the place. A lot of collaboration with the DOJ, and there's a policing executive order, et cetera. So it's always at the top of my mind, but it's most certainly not the only use case here. But the concept is, you know, when you are using a technology that is inaccurate, it means you could have situations where things like a person's photo is taken and that identity is matched to an incorrect identity, or it's not identified at all, or it tends to be inaccurate based upon certain complexions of skin or on sex, gender, right? And that's a real problem, right? That to me is where, you know, Shani talked before about, you know, civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy and all of those issues. Like, that's a clear violation. The irony is nobody tends to question a person. Like, nobody tends to question a officer at an airport or a security guard saying, you know, are you being responsible yourself? And we tend to look at the technology, but the same principles apply. And I think that's what's really missing is we have the principles and the structure for training, for compliance, for correcting misbehavior, for measuring a person and a human in the loop. We don't have those same principles for technology. And I think that's, when it comes to governance and oversight, that's essentially what we're doing. We are proving to the public that we can put that same level of governance and oversight onto the technology as you expect out of the people that you currently interact with.
It's well said. Thank you. Do you see, so for example, again, just my DoD background, right? So they have the JAKE, the Joint AI Center, and they instituted the Chief Digital and AI Officer, right? To try to standardize this stuff. Shani, you talk about standardization. Is DHS, are you thinking about those same kinds of things, or how are you thinking about standardizing? Or are you thinking about standardizing the types of AI or the verification and validation of AI so you do indeed have responsibility and ethical behavior?
There are areas where we are going a lot deeper than others, right? So again, you know, facial recognition is a whole area where we are diving in incredibly deep and have built a lot of working groups across the department. In general, you know, my responsibility, right? So, you know, what I am focusing on is how to integrate the executive order, how to integrate the expectations for assessing these systems, for meeting the 9 principles. How do we integrate that to our existing acquisition lifecycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at identifying a need, when we look at analyzing and selecting a technology, when we look at implementing that technology, what are the specific checkpoints in which we are verifying that a technology is purposeful and performance driven? Where are we looking at if AI is going to provide a safe, secure, and resilient support of the mission, et cetera? And, you know, not everything can happen at the same time, right? So we have to look at certain aspects of that earlier on in the process before we start defining what are accuracy measures and how are we going to validate that and how are we going to continue to assess that, right? So that has been the predominant push on my side, because first off, we can't just create new governance bodies and get the undersecretary and, you know, S2 in working groups for everything, because I'll have one on zero trust tomorrow and CX the day after that. And we will, you know, until kingdom come, they'll be in meetings for governance and oversight. So the most practical, efficient, and effective method that we have is to leverage the existing processes and procedures and oversight we have in place. And so we are going through that process of the mapping, right? So here is what OSTP provided as an example of a measure for this specific principle, right? So, you know, have you validated against NIST guidelines, right? Well, where does it happen? Does it happen when I've already selected the technology? Is that when I put together my test evaluation master plan? So we're starting to look at where in the life cycle of AI and ML technologies earlier on in the the evaluation of the technology, I'm starting to think of technology readiness level. So lower in the technology readiness level, what are we looking at versus higher in the technology readiness level, right? So that whole spectrum there, that's been the focus. That's the big challenge, because if we can start doing that, then as AI evolves, we now have an effective model to be able to evolve with it.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Tom, from your perspective, right? You're selling into the government, right? You're selling into various agencies of the government who are thinking a lot about responsible AI and ethical AI and trustworthy AI and these kinds of things, and cyber as well, right? How do you think about when you're developing a product? How do you think about that?
Well, there's been for a number of years a discussion about security by design. It's a great concept. Industrial manufacturers are progressively thinking about their HVAC systems and similar types of large-scale systems from a security-first point of view. You know, in the past, those systems hadn't always been constructed from a security-first point of view. Indeed, the same is true from a privacy point of view. I think as industry rapidly goes into AI, leveraging the opportunity set, the importance is to think through security by design sort of in the AI sphere also. You know, AI systems are profoundly effective. They can deliver great results at scale, but hackers are also thinking about how to manipulate some of the inherent challenges in AI systems. And hackers today, you know, are already executing large-scale exploits, leveraging, you know, a lot of open source technology to put in false data that fool these systems. Hackers are using AI to test bed their attack models, test their best-in-class malware capabilities, and, you know, rapidly automate, learn from their mistakes. So it's the classic cat and mouse game that continues. And in some cases, defenders are at a disadvantage, right? Because we have to be right all the time. And as you all know, attackers really only have to be right once or twice. So I think the charge on the private sector side is to really think through whether it's industrial control systems, whether it's cybersecurity systems, whether it's an automated driving system, to really think through scenarios, game those scenarios, and build in security right from the beginning. So that we can deliver on what is, I still believe, the great promise of AI in the future.
Thanks for that. Shani, I want to go back to you for a second. You'd mentioned a number of different frameworks and standards. And what do you think is missing? Because in the context of what Tom said, there's adversarial AI, right? We all know that. And you know, people are attacking AIs. And as Tom said, it's easier to be an attacker than a defender. What do you think is missing? What do you think is needed? Or do you think we have everything we do need in terms of these frameworks and governance standards?
No, I think it's an evolving problem. And a lot of it is also centered around what we understand about where models fail. So it could be an adversarial attack, or it could just be, you know, models are brittle. A lot of these systems are still fairly brittle. And so I think one of the focus areas has to be around understanding those failure points a little bit better. And I think that there are plenty of the efforts that I mentioned already, either on the research resource side, or the research institutes that are really building up around these problem sets. I think there are a lot of good people tackling those problems, but there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in understanding where and how and under what circumstances models fail and for what reasons, so that we better understand on the attack side how to defend, and also how to deal with potential failures that don't even come from attacks, or just incidental or accidental in the course of model use itself.
Dave, what are your thoughts on that? What's missing? What don't we have right now?
Oh boy. All right. So I have to talk from my perspective, right? It's my perspective, right? So I'm under management, right? I'm when it comes to the responsibility to implement, when it comes to responsibility to manage effectively, that's where I have to live. I do not work on the auspices of the academics. I do not work on the auspices of the theoretical, right? So DHS Science and Technology lives and dies in that space. I feel that there has not been a great feedback loop. I think that the academic community is working very hard to identify what they feel is the most appropriate guidance to provide, standards to provide, et cetera. And the operational side of things, the management side of things, is working hard to comply and to meet the expectations of that. I am still looking for that feedback loop to where the academic community is plugged in enough to the operational side of things to where we are looking at the real application of technology, not necessarily the academic understanding of the potential for technology, right? So what is that feedback loop, and how do we start looking at the lessons learned we have today around the technology and the problems we have today with the technology to reinforce the academic research in the future, not necessarily a concept of the guidance is out there. Let's put that now on the shelf and work on the next guidance. Like, I think it needs to evolve. There needs to be a feedback loop. And I think that the operational side of government and building technology needs to be one of the most important providers of requirements and data to the academic community. And it needs to be in a big old loopy loop there. Big old loopy loop.
I really like that. I think that is really, really important, because you get, well, you know this as I do. I mean, the academics can go off and write papers, but that doesn't mean it's actually influenced by actual use cases, right? And then that therefore becomes very hard to adopt by the user community. Have you seen any? Hi, Megan. Real quick. Have you seen any examples where you do have that kind of feedback? Have you ever seen that?
Like where I need it, or where it's working well?
Where it's working well. Where have you seen it working well?
Facial recognition, 1000%. It is one of the areas where I have personally seen the academic community around science and technology working with NIST, working with the components to develop, to run assessments, to look at the vendor community and turn that into guidance. Like, it has been incredibly effective. I want that in all areas. I want that in all areas, Reggie.
Got it. Roger that. Okay. Megan, my apologies.
No, not at all, Dr. Brothers. This is a great panel, and appreciate all the questions coming in from the audience. I've got a quick one for Mr. Larrimore, but someone wanted to know, would an agency like DHS benefit from planning, soliciting, and awarding training contracts, focused on leveraging industry expertise within the AI ML talent pool to help train and develop the DHS workforce? Is that something you're looking at?
It's not something. It's an idea. It's not something we are actively pursuing. You know, I tend to question, is the right approach to look at AI and ML as a training concept in itself, or do we need to do a better job of figuring out how AI relates to law enforcement, how AI relates to grants management, emergency management, how AI relates to the immigration life cycle, and start making sure that we are introducing AI/ML topics there on the mission side, not just on the technical side. Jury's still out, right? We do have, from a acquisition lifecycle perspective, there are some kind of, classes that can be provided through DAU for AI/ML, but it's not a requirement. It's not a standard. We do not have a readily available repository of training that you can go onto our, learning management system and go kind of learn at your leisure. Doesn't exist now. It's a partnership with the chief learning officer, the chief human capital officer, and it is an idea. It is not something that I am leading, or something that we have committed for the foreseeable future. Good question.
Thank you. Yeah, and then this is a question I think all of our panelists might want to have a chance to answer, but someone was asking, where does the US rank globally in terms of AI investment, and what specific areas should Congress be focused on in the near term to ensure global competitiveness in the future? And then also, what federal agencies are leading the way on AI and R&D in particular, and what agencies may need a boost? So I will leave you with that question, and I've got a couple more if there's time.
Well, I'm gonna provide a snarky response, and then I'll let Shani speak. I'm sure she has got a lot more of the global knowledge, but you will find out very soon, because very shortly after the AIML executive order came out, GAO instituted a CFO Act agency-wide audit on AIML, which includes kind of understanding the cost in these various areas. So we already do have an idea of all of the use cases that we use across the Department of Homeland Security. That is a active area of trying, and again, it's mapping the technology readiness level to the actual development work, how much time is spent on R&D versus actually, implementing a technology. So it is, I don't think that I can today pinpoint a number. We have the ability to generate a number, but we're still, working with GAO to develop what's the model to actually calculate that cost for AIML. And then I'll let you, I'm sure she's got way more knowledge on government-wide.
Yeah, I think, while the US is still a world leader in AI in a lot of ways, there is definitely a need to keep kind of pushing on this, is particularly for the challenges we mentioned today, like workforce. That's both, hiring and workforce development for teams that don't necessarily have or need to have the full technical skills, but need to be aware of how AI is implemented in their realms, in their kind of portfolios. So there's plenty there that is still forthcoming. I think in general, research, innovation, a lot of that is still taking place here. The policy and the governance is evolving, so there's a lot of work to do there. But I think trying to pinpoint by amounts may not be the best way to look at it. I think particularly there's potentially open source, scalable, free systems that are very impactful. So we're not really thinking it through the lens of pure dollar amounts. I think we have to think through impact first and foremost, and then think through, are there additional resources that need to be, added to that equation, or what does that look like? Does it even need to be on the technical side, or are we spending the right resources to make sure our lawyers, our policy writers and other folks in those larger systems are ready and can do their work incorporating an AI system effectively.
So the
go ahead. My fault. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, just wanted to jump in on this. It's the question of global competition in AI is a very, very interesting one. A reference book is AI Superpowers, right? I think most of us have read it. It's been kind of a standard work. I mean, it looks right now as though it's the US and China that are in the pole positions on capabilities in the AI area. The European Union certainly has a lot of capability. I think that our leading companies, whether it's AWS, Google, others, our research capabilities on AI and delivering AI at scale is probably unmatched. On the other side of the ledger, China has done an impressive job in the commercialization of AI, using AI capabilities in e-commerce, right? They've been able to get the benefit of a market of 700 million folks that are really on the cutting edge of using technology for services of a very basic kind, right? Getting food delivered, taxis, what have you. And the Chinese have really done an excellent job of leveraging AI in those settings. There's a $30 trillion opportunity on AI on a global scale. And so a lot of market cap opportunities are there for all companies. And I think it's really around continuing to win that race that's going to be vital in terms of our national competitiveness. And so that's where a partnership with government really comes in, and continuing to double down on investment in R&D in universities that, throughout the history of our country has delivered so much value and innovation. You wouldn't have Intel today had it not been for the NASA program early and the need for, chips that can operate very quickly.
Megan, I was just gonna add, I was gonna mention the same book because that's a great book, AI Superpowers. But I was also gonna mention Georgetown CSET, Center for Security and Emerging Technology. They have a lot of papers. They've done a lot of work looking at competitiveness, and that's another resource.
Great. Well, I think we've got about 2 minutes left. So I'll leave you with one maybe quick, if you have quick thoughts on it, that would be helpful. And then Dr. Brothers, I'll let you kind of wrap up and get the final thoughts from your panel. But we did have a couple questions on just the tie-in between AI and zero trust. And I realize that's probably a whole topic in and of itself, but I don't know if Tom or Mr. Larrimore, if you have just a couple of quick thoughts on what the nexus is between zero trust and AI.
So, just very quickly, when we talk about leveraging AI, ML technology for zero trust, I mean, zero trust itself is a concept. It's like saying, how does it affect your network or your data? And the idea is AI, ML can be used for all those places, right? So when we talk about tagging data, right, for sensitivity, right, and how it needs to be protected, AI, ML application. 1,000%, absolutely. When we talk about network and observability and telemetry data, AI, ML, being able to ingest all of that data happening on your network real time and actually start making proactive decision making. Again, AI, ML can be leveraged for all of those points. When we talk about device management, et cetera, like we have already seen, 10 years ago, I was getting briefs from various companies starting to apply AI, ML practices to how they're doing endpoint management, right? So we are already leveraging AI, ML when it comes to cybersecurity and zero trust. It's just whether or not it fits into that OMB bucket that says all of these things need to get done.
I guess what I'll do is given the time, let all of you have a couple of moments just for last thoughts, things that you either gleaned or that didn't have a chance to say. Tom, let's start with you.
Well, again, thanks for the opportunity to take part in this really great panel. It's been a pleasure. Technology has a way of exceeding the bound of current policy. And that's a challenge that exists today. It's a challenge that existed 30 years ago. So I think the burden is on the private sector and government policymakers to continue thinking about technology innovations and continue thinking about ways to update policies to keep up in a way that's responsible, fair, balanced, that drives innovation, but also protects equities. And so that's just something that requires looking at best practices, looking globally, seeing what's working, and then being willing to, break things and start new things and continuing to just adapt. And
Shani?
all of these burdens are that much more relevant in an AI world.
Thanks, Tom. Shani?
Yeah, I think especially at the intersections, that's where we're going to see a lot of the critical work being done. So people who are trained in the law and in technology, or at least enough to understand that overlap space, policy and technology, not just one side or the other. I think that interdisciplinary approach and process and training is going to be really important. But really appreciate the time today and my panelists and Dr. Brothers. So thank you.
Thanks, Shani. David?
The only other thing I wanted to say is I'm proud to announce that I think starting on Monday of this week, the CTO office at DHS headquarters has created a emerging technologies branch. So it's kind of a real commitment to providing governance and oversight on these technologies for the safe and effective use of AI, ML, zero trust, customer experience, all of these emerging technology and concepts. So really excited to announce that.
That's great. Thanks. Just in closing thoughts, listen, great panel. Thank you so much for your insights and comments. I'd love to keep the conversation going, but over to you, Megan. Thanks again.